Attack on Europe's biggest nuclear plant triggers panic in Ukraine and alarm around the world. America called it a war crime. Russia says it's now in charge of the site, but in the midst of international condemnation, Ukraine watches in horror as the destruction continues.
The fighting on the other side of the Dnieper River here highlights the potentially terrifying consequences of war in a country with 15 nuclear reactors.
Warnings that the suffering of civilians will worsen as Russia continues its attempts to seize control city by city. Tonight we'll be live with our teams in Kyiv, Washington and Downing Street. In Russia, a crackdown on media, dissent and protests. And shock in the world of sport with the death of Australian cricket and cricketing star Shane Warne.
It was his character and the way he played the game. He was a showman on the pitch. People would empty the bars to come and watch Shane Warne bowl.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. Russia's invasion of Ukraine took an even more sinister turn overnight with the shelling of Europe's largest nuclear plant. The attack on the Zaporizhzhia power station set one building alight, prompting fears of a nuclear catastrophe. Thankfully, the International Atomic Energy Authority confirmed there was no release of radioactive material or damage to the reactors. But the assault was condemned by world leaders. Britain called it reckless. Ukraine's president said it was nuclear terror. Our correspondent Dan Rivers has been near to the Zaporizhzhia plant and sent this report.
Today there was no outward sign of the battle which had raged around Europe's biggest nuclear power station. But footage inside the complex gives a chilling glimpse into the nuclear Russian roulette playing out at Enerhodar as the bullets and shells flew. The moment a column of Russian troops arrived was filmed by a worker at the plant. After dark, flares were fired to illuminate their targets. As volleys of bullets slammed into buildings just a short distance from the reactors. One building used for training was set alight by the fighting. The consequences of a round going a few hundred metres further don't bear thinking about. Today, the International Atomic Energy Authority confirmed the plant itself remains undamaged.
All the safety systems of the 6 reactors at the plant were not affected at all, and that there has been no release of radioactive material. No release of radioactive material.
In Nikopol, across the river from the plant, the memories of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986 still linger with the old and haunt the thoughts of the young who've watched the dramatisation on TV. Are you worried that something terrible could happen?
Yes, we all, especially older people just they know what was in Chernobyl, and now they just fear because it can be again. It can be again.
The fighting on the other side of the Dnieper River here highlights the potentially terrifying consequences of war in a country with 15 nuclear reactors. 6 of them are here at this one power station. Today, President Zelensky underlined what a stray shell could mean.
Російські війська атакували Запорізьку атомну станцію, найбільшу в Європі. Вона одна могла бути як 6 Чорнобилів. Російські танкісти знали, що вони обстрілюють. Прямою наводкою по станції – це терор небаченого рівня.
It's not just a threat to Ukraine. It could send a radioactive cloud across much of Europe. Once again, the world is realizing this war has global consequences. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Eastern Ukraine.
The Zaporizhzhia power plant produces around half of all the nuclear energy generated by Ukraine. It's made up of 6 nuclear reactors, Only one of them, reactor 4, is currently operating. 3 are shut down. 2 are in low power mode. The reactor's shells are designed to withstand earthquakes, and if power supplies get cut, diesel generators would kick into action. But if they were to fail and coolant stops being pumped, it could trigger a meltdown similar to the one seen in Fukushima back in 2011. Experts think an explosion like Chernobyl is unlikely, but these reactors are a different type to those involved in the 1986 disaster. But news of the attack overnight will bring back painful memories. Well, the actions of Russian forces were condemned both here and across the world today. It prompted an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Our deputy political editor, Anushka Asthana, is in Downing Street, and our US correspondent, Emma Murphy, is at the White House. Emma, let's come to you first. The Security Council is in session after the Prime Minister called for that emergency meeting.
Yes, they've just finished and it's been pretty grim listening. You can imagine the scene here at the Oval Office in the White House last night as they watched on television as the situation unfolded in real time at that nuclear power plant. They were unable to establish exactly what was going on, and the fear, I'm told, was palpable. Now, at some point in the course of the evening, the President spoke with President Zelensky to try and get an idea from him about what they knew. And then a little bit later on, the UK called for that emergency meeting of the Security Council. They gathered this morning in New York and they laid bare the fears of the global community about the dangers that we now face as a result of a war taking place in a country with so many nuclear reactors. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who is the US's ambassador to the United Nations, said that last night, by the grace of God, the world averted a terrible nuclear catastrophe. Those are the words that were ringing in people's ears today as they urged Russia to try and take the fighting away from those zones with nuclear power plants.
Thanks, Emma. OK, to Anushka now in Downing Street. President Zelensky also rang Boris Johnson in the night.
That's right. The Prime Minister was sleeping here at Downing Street and he was woken by a phone call at 1 a.m. He spoke to President Zelensky, heard about the nuclear plant, and there were some pretty tough words from Boris Johnson in response. He said that Putin could now directly threaten the safety of all of Europe. And if it's the safety of all of Europe that is threatened, then clearly that will change our response. But that isn't where we are at the moment. Diplomatic efforts today were in a similar position to the ones that they've been for the rest of this week. The Foreign Secretary was in Brussels meeting her G7 and NATO counterparts. Very clear message there from NATO that they stand by Article 5. That means collective defence for their members. But as we know, Ukraine is not a member, so no troops on the ground. The focus is still on economic sanctions. Here in the UK, there has been some criticism that we haven't gone fast enough on oligarchs. Well, tonight, the government has laid an amendment, the same as one laid by Labour earlier this week, that means when emergency legislation gets through Parliament next week, that EU sanctions and US sanctions can quickly be applied here as well.
OK, Nishka, thank you. OK, let's take a look at how the situation looks on the ground now on day 9 of the Russian invasion. The shaded areas, as you can see, show the territory Russia controls, including now one of Ukraine's 4 nuclear power stations. According to the UK Ministry of Defence, 5 cities have been completely surrounded by Russian forces. Mariupol, in particular, continues to face heavy bombardment, with much of its infrastructure destroyed. While just to the north of the capital, Kyiv, a 40-mile-long Russian convoy that's been stalled for days still appears not to have moved. From the city, our Europe editor James Mates has the latest.
One by one, Ukrainian cities are coming under bombardment. This time it's the turn of Zhytomyr, west of Kiev, about as far west as Russian forces have so far come. By day 9 of this war, the pictures have become no less damning for the fact they're so familiar. As ever, civilian buildings in civilian areas flattened, apparently for no better reason than to destroy Ukrainian morale and the fabric of their society. Vitaly Dankevich is a pillar of that society, a teacher, a family man, now sheltering at home in fear for what may become of his wife and children.
We are a very small country, but with very brave people. And these brave And these brave people tried to fight. We tried to fight and we have success. But I don't know a time for which we can do this fight.
Outside the southern city of Mariupol, the Russians have released pictures of the wreckage of the Ukrainian defences. We're seeing little from the inside, but the besieged deputy mayor has got this message out.
So city is surrounded by Russian troops from 3 directions. So in fact, city is blocked. Internally, city is controlled by Ukrainian army and Ukrainian National Guard and police. Putin and Russian army totally destroyed all infrastructure. I mean, city lives for 3 days without electricity, without water, sanitary systems.
In the middle of all this, Vladimir Putin made a frankly bizarre appearance on Russian TV, apparently of the view we should all just get back to normal.
We have no bad intentions towards our neighbors. We do not see any need here to aggravate or worsen our relations. I think that everyone should think about how to normalize relations and cooperate normally.
Cooperate normally after this. The view from the Ukrainian government is that if they're allowed to lose here, this is what awaits elsewhere in Europe.
I'm certain that this war develops in a way where the moment will come. You will be willing to provide us with anything, literally anything that we need to stop Putin from hitting you and turning Europe into the nightmare. And my hope, my only hope, is that it will not be too late.
For much of Ukraine, it may already be too late. Whoever wins this war seems likely to inherit little but a shattered land emptied of millions of its people.
James, President Zelensky has been speaking in the last few minutes, hasn't he? What has he said?
Yeah, I mean, another television address by him, addressed not just to his own people, but to Europe as well. And once again, he's saying, look, I'd like to call on you not to be silent, support Ukraine, support our efforts, support our fight, because if Ukraine will not stand, Europe will not stand. If we fall, you fall. I mean, there is this extraordinary contrast between the eloquence and physical courage of Zelensky and the isolated, angry, somewhat bizarre appearances in the Kremlin of Vladimir Putin. And these things matter because this is not just a shooting war, it's also an information war. The other bit of news of not insignificant interest to those of us here in the city is that that convoy that 4 or 5 days ago was seen to be approaching the city, well, the satellite pictures today suggest that it has barely moved, if at all. It shows an enormous traffic jam. We understand that there have been attacks at the head of that column, which may be causing a big traffic jam behind it. You've got to think that it cannot be good for Russian morale to be stuck out there in that exposed position. But the Russians probably will sort it out fairly soon. But for the time being, that is good news.
James, thank you. Well, the UN says at least 331 Ukrainian civilians have been killed and 675 injured, although the real number is likely to be much higher. Marina Kalabina was a doctor at the Children's Hospital in Kyiv. She was driving her injured nephew to a hospital when their car was attacked and she was killed. 62-year-old Sergei Zevleva helped hundreds of Ukrainian special needs children find adoptive parents overseas. He had dual American and Ukrainian citizenship, so could have left the country, but had chosen to stay. He was also killed in Kyiv. And a teenager, known only as Ilya, died at an emergency field hospital in Mariupol. He's seen here with his father, Sergei. Well, early this week, we reported how a family of 5 were killed as they tried to flee the fighting in Kherson. Today, one of their surviving relatives spoke to ITV News about what happened. John Ray's report has details of their deaths, which you may find upsetting.
Vanyushka was born just 5 weeks ago into another world, a past where Ukraine was at peace. He was, say his family, a gift for his mother Irina and his 6-year-old sister Sophia. Then came the war to their home city, Kherson. They took the decision to escape, a fatal miscalculation. Rather than freedom, they found a Russian checkpoint. Dennis, the baby's uncle, was witness to their last moments.
Я разговариваю с мамой и слышу крики. Боже, ребенок, как так можно было? И прям крики.
Dennis was on the phone to his mother, who was traveling with the children.
А дальше слышу тишина. Тишина, машина остановилась. Я включил громкую связь, слушал, что там было, что происходило. Я слышу, как кричит Ванюшка. Он просто разрывался, он кричал, убили, там ранили. Они начали расстреливать машину, они полностью расстреляли зверски машину. Потом они добивали. Ванюша еще кричал, минуты 2 он кричал, а потом он просто замолчал.
There were no survivors. Sophia, the family's golden girl, her mother and the children's grandparents, Anna, a teacher, Oleg, a dedicated grandfather. They all perished.
Пока я жив, пока они не убьют меня и не доберутся ко мне, то они получат. Я буду стоять до последнего. Мы их победим. Русские люди тоже услышат правду.
But for now, the truth is almost impossible to bear. John Ray, ITV News.
And an update on one of the stories we brought you earlier this week. 10-year-old Paulina Kudrin was killed, along with her parents and 6-year-old brother, Semyon. Their car was shot at while they tried to flee to safety from Kyiv. Well, Sophia, Paulina's older sister, is the sole survivor. She's now in Rome for further treatment for a bullet in her spine. Well, as President Putin pushes ahead with the brutal invasion, he's also been tightening his grip on power at home. Russia's parliament today passed a new law cracking down on dissent, and some, mostly young Russians, have had enough, as our international affairs editor Raggy Omar reports.
The opposition to the war in Ukraine by the Russian government may be small, but they are significant, they are passionate, and they are not going away. Arrests continued last night in the heart of Moscow and across other major cities such as St. Petersburg. Whatever their fortunes on foreign battlefields, no government can afford to lose support on the home front. When they do, they tend to blame the messenger rather than the message. And so in Russia, independent media channels such as TV Rain are forced to choose between reporting what's happening in Ukraine or refusing to broadcast. The channel's journalists chose to walk out. Viewers were treated instead to archive footage of Swan Lake. One journalist from the channel decided to leave Russia altogether.
And no one knows what's next for us. I mean, independent journalists, those who do not follow the official narrative about the war in Ukraine.
He is by no means alone. In the past 3 days, there's been a small but steady stream of mostly young Russians who've decided that life under Vladimir Putin's rule is no longer worth enduring and have left Russia, many arriving in neighbouring Finland. And the Russian government is determined that its narrative of what's happening in Ukraine is what their citizens see and hear. Today, the Russian parliament passing a law introducing jail terms for people who circulate what they call fake information, such as saying Russia has invaded Ukraine or is bombing civilian areas. Vladimir Putin's grip on power in Russia is in no doubt this evening. But these are the first chill winds he will feel that some Russians oppose his war on Ukraine. Raggy Omar, ITV News.
OK, let's look at events here. And a mother and her partner have been found guilty of killing a 2-year-old boy by repeatedly beating him. Kyrell Matthews was found with 41 fractures to his ribs when he died. A jury heard distressing secret recordings of the abuse he suffered in the lead up to his violent death. Chloe Keedy reports.
Happy birthday! Felicia Shirley sang to her son Kyrell on his 2nd birthday. But off camera, this smiling toddler was being subjected to violent abuse.
I only figured out to say cheese.
When he died, Kyrell Matthews had 41 rib fractures and a catastrophic cut to his liver. They were injuries that had been inflicted on him by his mum and her then boyfriend, Kimar Brown. A jury today found him guilty of murder. Felicia Shirley was acquitted of murdering her son, but convicted of manslaughter.
All we're left with is basically memories, pictures, videos.
Kyrell's paternal grandfather Carl and his partner Christine said they had no idea of the horror Kyrell was being subjected to.
He was always smiling. He was always happy. He was well loved by the whole of our family. And we're going to miss him.
But Carl says he started to see less of his grandson after Kyrell's mum met Kimar Brown, the three of them becoming increasingly isolated inside her South London flat.
Hello, you're through the NHS 111 service, and what is it I can help you with today?
Basically, Kyrell, he's been acting really funny, like his body's floppy and his eyes is rolling back.
Shirley was told an ambulance was on its way and was instructed to carry out CPR on her son. Her and Brown claimed this was what caused Kyrell's injuries, but the jury didn't believe them. The court heard that Felicia Shirley would leave her phone recording inside the flat in an attempt to catch her partner secretly contacting other women. What those recordings actually captured was evidence that both of them were abusing a 2-year-old boy.
He was torturing him. He was torturing him. He became their entertainment. That's what he was their entertainment.
I didn't know that he was going through this suffering and there was nothing that I could do to help.
Kyrell's short life was one filled with violence and pain. His grandparents say they will remember a loving, laughing boy. A boy who somehow kept smiling. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
There was shock in the world of sport today with the death of Australian cricketing star Shane Warne. The bowler was found dead at a villa in Thailand. It's thought the 52-year-old has suffered a heart attack. As Amy Lewis reports, Warne became one of the biggest sports stars ever thanks to his incredible talent and flamboyant personality.
For Shane Warne, this wasn't just cricket, it was theatre. From his first delivery in his first Ashes, it was clear he was no ordinary player. It was nicknamed the Ball of the Century, and it made him an instant star. But there were no hard feelings from the man he defeated.
Look, as we often spoke, he just sort of said, look, mate, he said, all I was trying to do was get it down the other end. He said he will always be remembered probably as the greatest leg spinner in the Test history so far.
The Australian went on to torment teams all over the world, especially his country's great rivals, England, taking 195 Ashes wickets. During his 15-year international career, he took more than 700 Test scalps, the second most in Test history.
There it is. Australia have regained the Ashes.
He retired in 2007 following Australia's 5-0 clean sweep of England. His career wasn't without its controversies though. He battled a drink problem and in 2003 he tested positive for a banned substance he claimed his mother gave him to help him with weight loss.
I feel that I'm a victim of the anti-doping hysteria.
Subtlety was never his style. His flamboyance on the pitch was matched by his fame off it.
Oh no, come on.
Playing quite the sport in the Australian version of I'm a Celebrity. And he had a string of high-profile relationships, including being engaged to the model and actress Liz Hurley. He was always respected and loved by those in his sport.
It was his character and the way he played the game. He was a showman on the pitch. People would empty the bars to come and watch Shane Warne bowl. It was the whole theatre of it when he was bowling, and I think that's what people really bought into.
England's cricketers held a 1-minute silence ahead of their match against the West Indies in his memory. The sport has lost one of its greatest and most iconic cricketers of all time, one who loved being centre stage.
I liked loud music, I was smoked, I drank, and I bowled a bit of leg spin, that was sort of me. I don't have any regrets.
Shane Warne, who's died at the age of 52. And finally, in the midst of so much loss, a moment to smile. After a long journey out of Ukraine, one little girl is enjoying marking her 7th birthday inside a refugee camp on the Romanian border.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Look at her little face. Volunteers and emergency service workers at the base in Siret gathered together to surprise Irina outside the tent where she's taking shelter with her family. They organised an impromptu party, complete with a birthday cake, balloons and hats to ensure her special day didn't go unnoticed. Happy birthday, Irina. OK, that's it from us for now. Tom will be here later with news at 10, but tomorrow morning we'll bring you a special programme here on ITV with all the latest developments from Ukraine. You can watch ITV News Weekend Morning from 7 a.m. So for me and the team, both here and abroad, bye-bye.